The screen flickers to life, revealing a grainy black and white scene that feels like something ripped straight from a classified government vault. A figure lies motionless on a metal table, its elongated limbs and oversized head unmistakably otherworldly. Surgeons in hazmat suits hover over the body, their tools glinting under harsh lights as they peel back layers of skin that don't look quite human. This is the infamous Alien Autopsy footage, a film that exploded onto the global stage in 1995, igniting a firestorm of debate that still rages decades later. Was this shocking footage the smoking gun proving we're not alone in the universe? Or was it the most elaborate hoax ever pulled off? A masterclass in deception designed to play on our deepest curiosities and fears. Picture this, a world on the brink of the digital age where the internet was still in its infancy and trust in authority was crumbling. Into that uncertainty dropped this haunting film, a silent, shaky reel that claimed to show the dissection of an extraterrestrial recovered from the Roswell crash in 1947. It wasn't just the bizarre visuals that captivated millions, it was the eerie plausibility of it all. The clinical sterility of the room, the matter-of-fact way the doctors handled the body, even the cryptic details that seemed to align with decades of UFO lore. For believers, it was validation, for skeptics, it was a challenge, and for the rest of us, it became an obsession. What makes this story so compelling isn't just the question of whether the footage was real. It's how this shaky, indistinct film became a cultural lightning rod, a Rorschach test for our collective imagination. Some saw it as proof of a government cover-up, others as a brilliant work of fiction. But beneath the surface lies an even bigger mystery. Why does this footage still haunt us? Why, after years of debunking attempts, expert analyses, and even confessions from some involved, do we keep coming back to it? Maybe it's because the Alien Autopsy taps into something primal, our yearning to know if we're truly alone and what might be hiding in the shadows of our own history. So let's take a closer look beyond the grainy frames and the whispers of conspiracy to uncover the truth behind one of the most enigmatic pieces of footage ever captured. Because whether it's real or not, the story behind it is stranger than fiction. To understand why the Alien Autopsy footage landed like a bomb in the mid-90s, we have to rewind to the summer of 1947, when a rancher in Roswell, New Mexico, stumbled upon debris so strange it sparked the first official UFO cover-up in history. At first, the military proudly announced they'd recovered a flying disc, only to retract the statement within 24 hours, swapping it for a much less exciting explanation, a downed weather balloon. But that abrupt reversal didn't quiet the rumors, it poured gasoline on them. Because here's the thing about Roswell, it wasn't just the crash itself that stuck in public memory. It was the whiplash between the military's conflicting stories, the hushed testimonies from witnesses who swore they saw alien bodies, and the eerie sense that someone, somewhere, wasn't telling the truth. For decades, Roswell simmered as the ultimate "what if" of UFO lore, a gap in the official narrative that invited speculation. Then came the 90s, a golden age for conspiracy theories, where shows like The X-Files turned government secrecy into prime-time entertainment. Suddenly, the idea that a mysterious film from Roswell could surface, one showing actual extraterrestrial remains, didn't just feel possible, it felt inevitable. The Alien Autopsy footage didn't just borrow from Roswell's legacy. It plugged directly into the collective skepticism that had been building for half a century. Every grainy frame seemed to whisper, "This is what they didn't want you to see," but here's where it gets even more fascinating. The footage didn't just rely on Roswell's mystique, it amplified it. Details in the film, like the creature's six-fingered hands or the dated surgical tools, mirrored long-circulating rumors about the crash. Whether by accident or design, it felt like a missing puzzle piece, one that made sense of the military's secrecy. And that's the real power of a good myth. It doesn't just answer questions, It makes you wonder why you ever doubted in the first place. So when the footage hit the airwaves, it didn't just revive Roswell. It rewrote it, turning a half-forgotten incident into the cornerstone of a much darker, stranger story. One that, true or not, we're still trying to unravel today. In May 1995, the world got its first taste of the alien autopsy footage from a man who seemed as unlikely a whistleblower as you could imagine. Ray Santilli wasn't a government insider or a seasoned UFO investigator. He was a British music producer with a knack for film preservation. But when he stepped onto the stage at the Museum of London, surrounded by flashing cameras and skeptical reporters, he made a claim that would send shockwaves through the media. He announced he had obtained a reel of film, not just any film, but footage documenting the autopsy of an extraterrestrial being recovered from Roswell. And he didn't stumble upon it in some dusty archive. According to Santilli, the film came from a retired military cameraman who'd secretly held onto it for decades, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. The press conference was pure theater. Santilli played coy, refusing to show the full footage upfront, teasing reporters with brief, tantalizing glimpses. The clips were grainy, jarring, and disturbingly clinical. Just enough to ignite speculation, but not enough to prove anything definitively. Journalists leaned in, cameras zoomed, and the room buzzed with a mix of excitement and disbelief. Because here was the thing, Santilli didn't present himself as a true believer. He framed it as a historical artifact, something he'd acquired almost by accident while hunting for Elvis Presley memorabilia. That casual detachment made his claim even more intriguing. If this was a hoax, why would a music producer with no prior ties to ufology stake his reputation on it? If it was real, why had it surfaced now, nearly 50 years after Roswell? The media erupted. Newspapers splashed the story across front pages. TV networks ran breathless segments, and suddenly everyone had an opinion. Critics pointed out inconsistencies, the film's suspiciously crisp edits, the lack of chain of custody documentation, the odd lighting that didn't quite match 1940s military footage. But believers latched onto the eerie details, the way the creature's black eyes seemed almost reflective, the unnatural proportions of its limbs, the sterile, almost indifferent demeanor of the surgeons. It wasn't just a video, it was a Rorschach test. Some saw undeniable proof, others saw an elaborate fake, and Santilli, he sat back, letting the frenzy build, insisting he was just the messenger. What made this moment so explosive wasn't just the footage itself. It was the perfect storm of timing and cultural appetite. The 90s were a golden age for conspiracy theories, with shows like The X-Files making government cover-ups mainstream entertainment. The internet was still young, but forums and early message boards lit up with debates, theories, and wild speculation. And then there was Roswell, the UFO community's holy grail, a story that had been simmering for decades. Santilli's film didn't just drop into a vacuum, it landed in a world primed to dissect it, doubt it, and obsess over it. Whether by design or luck, he'd tapped into something deeper than curiosity. He'd tapped into our collective hunger for answers and our suspicion that the truth might be stranger than we'd ever imagined. The film opens with a shuddering, uneven shot of a makeshift medical facility. White canvas walls, harsh overhead lights casting long shadows, and an unmistakable air of urgency. A metal table dominates the center of the frame, draped in a stained sheet with medical instruments laid out with chilling precision. The camera lingers for a moment, as if the operator themselves is hesitating before panning down to reveal the body. It's lying face up, limbs splayed unnaturally, its grayish skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame that defies human proportions. The head is oversized, the eyes black and almond-shaped, the mouth a thin slit. There's no mistaking it. This is the moment the footage stakes its claim. This is an alien. As the so-called surgeons step into frame, clad in outdated hazmat suits with rounded, fogged-over visors, the dissection begins. The first incision is made along the torso, the scalpel gliding through what appears to be skin, but the texture is wrong. It doesn't peel back like human tissue. It lifts in sheets, almost rubbery, with no visible blood. The camera zooms in, shaky but relentless, as the surgeons probe deeper. A dark, tar-like substance oozes from the incision, pooling on the table. The creature's internal organs, if that's what they are, don't resemble anything from a biology textbook. They're asymmetrical, oddly segmented, some appearing almost metallic under the light. One of the surgeons lifts a six-fingered hand, examining it with detached curiosity before letting it drop back onto the table with a thud. The most infamous moment comes when the camera focuses on the creature's skull. A tool, some kind of saw, is pressed against the forehead, and the sound of grinding bone fills the silent film. The top of the head is removed, revealing a brain that's smaller than expected, with strange, stringy tendrils connecting it to the spine. The footage cuts abruptly, then resumes with a close-up of the creature's face, its features frozen in what could be interpreted as pain or simply the rigidity of death. The surgeons exchange glances, their body language unreadable behind their suits, before continuing their work with methodical detachment. Scattered throughout are bizarre details that linger in the mind long after the film ends. The camera occasionally catches glimpses of the room, a calendar on the wall with dates blurred, a clock with hands frozen at a suspiciously round number, a military-style boot stepping just into frame. These are the moments that fuel the debate. Are these careless slip-ups proof of a staged set, or are they intentional breadcrumbs left to deepen the mystery? The film's grainy quality adds to the unease, masking imperfections but also making it impossible to confirm or debunk key elements. Every shadow, every flicker of light feels deliberate, as if the footage itself is daring you to believe or to call its bluff. By the time the film cuts to black, leaving only the hum of an unseen projector, the effect is undeniable. Whether real or fabricated, the Alien Autopsy footage doesn't just present a claim. It immerses you in a narrative so visceral, so unnervingly clinical, that it bypasses skepticism and lodges itself in the subconscious. It's not just what you see that haunts you. It's what you're left wondering: who filmed this, why, and if it's fake, how did they make it feel so real? The creature on the autopsy table is unlike anything in human anatomy textbooks. Its elongated limbs are nearly skeletal, the joints too pronounced, with fingers stretching into an unnatural 6 digits, each tipped with a subtle claw-like curve. The hands alone are unsettling, their proportions all wrong, as if designed by someone who'd only heard of human anatomy secondhand. But it's the head that commands attention. A bulbous, oversized cranium dwarfing the frail body beneath, with black, almond-shaped eyes that dominate the face. Those eyes reflect no light, no pupil, just an ink-eye void that seems to swallow the room's harsh glare. The mouth is a mere slit, lipless and rigid, as if the creature never needed to speak or even breathe the way we do. Every detail feels calculated to unsettle, to defy our understanding of life itself. Inside, the mystery deepens. The surgeon's incisions reveal a torso cavity filled with organs that defy classification, asymmetrical masses with textures ranging from fibrous to almost metallic, some pulsing faintly despite the creature's apparent death. There's no recognizable heart, no lungs, just a tangled network of dark, cord-like structures connecting alien equivalents of biology. The lack of blood is jarring. Instead, a thick, tar-like fluid oozes sluggishly, pooling in the hollows of the body like spilled ink. When the skull is pried open, the brain is small, almost rudimentary, but threaded with silvery tendrils that suggest a nervous system far more complex than its size implies. This description didn't emerge in a vacuum. The creature's design mirrors decades of UFO eyewitness accounts. The classic gray alien, a figure etched into pop culture by countless abductee stories and close encounter reports. The oversized head, a staple of sleep paralysis hallucinations and alleged extraterrestrial encounters. The 6 fingers, a recurring detail in testimonies from supposed whistleblowers and military insiders. Even the black eyes, devoid of whites or irises, echo descriptions from Betty and Barney Hill's infamous 1961 abduction case. The footage didn't just borrow from UFO mythology, it refined it, crystallizing an image of alien life that felt eerily familiar to believers. Yet for all its adherence to UFO lore, the cadaver raises glaring questions. Why would an advanced species capable of interstellar travel have such a fragile, almost vestigial physique? Why no protective clothing or technology recovered with the body? The creature's design leans into the uncanny valley, just human enough to feel plausible, just alien enough to trigger primal unease. Skeptics argue these very inconsistencies expose the hoax, pointing to the creature's rubbery skin and lack of biomechanical detail as hallmarks of low-budget special effects. But believers counter, if this was a fake, why include details, like the 6 fingers or the odd organ placement, that align so precisely with obscure UFO reports? The truth may lie somewhere in between. The cadaver's design feels less like a scientific revelation and more like a Rorschach test of our collective fears and fascinations. It's a mirror held up to humanity's obsession with the unknown, reflecting back the image we've been conditioned to expect. Whether real or fabricated, the creature on that table became more than a body, it became a symbol. A symbol of our deepest question: if we're not alone, what else might be out there, waiting in the dark? The dissection begins with an incision along the torso, a moment that should feel familiar to anyone who's seen medical footage. The initial cut is precise, the scalpel sliding smoothly as if guided by real anatomical knowledge. The surgeon's hands move with the confidence of professionals, their fingers positioning instruments in ways that mirror genuine autopsy techniques. There's even a fleeting moment where one adjusts their grip mid-cut, a subtle detail that feels too nuanced for an amateur hoax. These are the touches that lend eerie credibility to the footage, making it easy to see why some medical professionals initially hesitated to dismiss it outright. But then the inconsistencies creep in. The creature's skin, while convincingly alien in texture, peels back like rubber sheeting rather than organic tissue. Real human skin has layers: epidermis, dermis, each with distinct properties, but here, the material behaves more like a prop from a Hollywood effect shop. When the surgeons lift a section of the skin, it retains its shape unnaturally, lacking the elasticity of flesh. And then there's the complete absence of blood vessels. In any earthly dissection, even in a preserved cadaver, you'd expect some vascular structure. Yet here, the incisions reveal only smooth, undifferentiated material beneath, with that strange black ooze pooling in places where blood should be. The internal organs are where the footage truly veers into the uncanny. Some appear almost plausible, a lumpy, asymmetrical mass that could be mistaken for a liver or spleen, if not for its odd metallic sheen. But others defy basic biology. One particularly jarring shot shows a surgeon lifting a segmented, tube-like structure that resembles nothing in human anatomy, its surface glistening as if wet yet leaving no residue on the gloves. The brain dissection is another red flag. The cranium opens too easily like a plastic shell, and the exposed brain lacks the intricate folds of a human cerebrum. Instead, it's smooth, small, and connected by those silvery threads. A design choice that feels more sci-fi than scientific. Perhaps the most telling clue lies in the surgeon's behavior. While their movements are deliberate, their technique raises eyebrows. At one point, a scalpel slips, slicing through what should be a major organ with no visible reaction from the team. In a real autopsy, even on an unknown specimen, there'd be caution, discussion, perhaps documentation of anomalies. Here, the surgeons work in near silence, their actions oddly repetitive, as if following a script rather than genuine curiosity. The lack of exploratory probing, no weighing of organs, no sampling for analysis suggests a performance designed for the camera, not a clinical examination. Yet for all its flaws, the footage's power lies in its ambiguity. The lighting, the grainy film quality, even the occasional camera shake, they all conspire to obscure just enough detail to keep doubt alive. It's a masterclass in suggestion, letting our minds fill in the gaps. When the surgeons pause to examine the creature's six-fingered hand, the moment feels weighted with significance, even if the biology makes no sense. That's the real genius of the Alien Autopsy. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be believable enough to make us wonder. And once that seed is planted, the truth hardly matters. The mystery becomes the story. The story of the Alien Autopsy footage hinges on one elusive figure, the man who supposedly filmed it. Ray Santilli called him Jack Barnett, a retired military cameraman who claimed to have been present during the Roswell recovery in 1947. According to Santilli, Barnett was hired by the U.S. government to document the autopsy of the recovered alien body, and decades later, nearing the end of his life, he decided to leak the footage to the world through Santilli. It's a compelling narrative, the kind of lone whistleblower tale that fuels conspiracy lore. But here's the problem. No one has ever been able to verify that Jack Barnett existed. Military records from the era show no photographer by that name assigned to Roswell, or anywhere near New Mexico during the alleged incident. No service records, no pension files, not even a grainy veterans reunion photo to place him at the scene. UFO researchers who dug into Barnett's background hit dead ends at every turn. Even the details Santilli provided about Barnett's life, his age, his rank, his alleged post-military career contradict known historical data. It's as if the man was a ghost conjured solely to lend credibility to the film. And that raises a glaring question. If Santilli's entire story rested on this cameraman's testimony, why couldn't he produce a single shred of evidence to prove Barnett was real? Skeptics argue Barnett was a fabrication, a convenient stand-in to explain the footage's origins without risking exposure. After all, a dead man Santilli claimed Barnett passed away shortly after handing over the film can't contradict the story. But believers counter with a darker theory. Maybe Barnett was real and his records were scrubbed. It wouldn't be the first time the military allegedly erased a person's history to protect a secret. The problem with that argument, without even a birth certificate or a single corroborating witness, it's impossible to prove. Barnett's shadowy presence feels less like a clue and more like a narrative device. A way to keep the mystery alive by ensuring the one person who could confirm or deny the footage's authenticity was forever out of reach. What's most telling is how Santilli's story evolved over time. In early interviews, he described Barnett in vague terms, but as scrutiny intensified, the details grew more elaborate, almost as if he was retroactively patching holes in the tale. At one point, Santilli even claimed to have met Barnett in person, yet could never produce a photo or signed document to back it up. The cameraman's name itself became a red flag. Jack Barnett is strikingly generic, the kind of alias you'd pick if you needed a name to disappear into a crowd. Compare that to real whistleblowers in UFO history like Bob Lazar, whose background, while controversial, was at least verifiable in parts. Barnett, by contrast, exists only in Santilli's anecdotes and the imaginations of those who want to believe. The absence of Barnett isn't just a missing piece of the puzzle, it's the gap where the entire foundation should be. Without him, the footage floats in a void, untethered to any provable origin. That doesn't automatically mean the film is fake, but it does mean its most critical witness is at best a phantom. And in a story already thick with doubt, that's the kind of mystery that lingers long after the screen fades to black. Ray Santilli's story about how he obtained the alien autopsy footage should have been airtight after all. It was the linchpin holding the entire mystery together. But over the years, his account began to unravel, plagued by inconsistencies that shifted with each telling. In his earliest interviews, Santilli claimed he'd acquired the film in 1992 from a retired military cameraman in Cleveland, Ohio, a straightforward enough tale. Yet by 1995, the location had changed. Suddenly, the exchange happened in Florida, and the cameraman's backstory grew more elaborate, complete with new details about his service record and the exact sum Santilli paid for the film, $20,000. Then, just months later, the price tag ballooned to $100,000 in another interview, with Santilli vaguely citing additional expenses as the reason for the discrepancy. Even the timeline didn't hold up under scrutiny. At one point, Santilli insisted the footage had been sitting in his possession since the late 80s, only to later admit it was edited and restored in 1994, a revelation that raised eyebrows given the film's supposed historical significance. Why would an original, government-classified reel need editing? And why did the story keep evolving? Skeptics pounced on these contradictions, pointing out that genuine whistleblowers don't typically revise their narratives so freely. But believers argued that Santilli might have been protecting his source, tweaking details to throw investigators off the trail. The most glaring inconsistency, though, centered on the film's condition. Initially, Santilli described it as nearly pristine, stored carefully for decades. Later, he admitted it was heavily damaged, moldy, degraded, with entire sections lost to time. This shift mattered because it explained away the footage's odd jumps and missing context, but it also undercut the idea of a meticulous government cover-up. If the military had gone to such lengths to hide the truth, why would they let such explosive evidence rot in some cameraman's attic? Then there was the curious case of the Elvis connection. In a bizarre twist, Santilli once claimed he'd originally traveled to the U.S. to track down rare Elvis Presley memorabilia, only to stumble upon the alien footage by accident. It was a colorful detail, one that made the story feel almost whimsical until journalists noted that Santilli's music production company had previously dealt in Elvis relics. Suddenly, the anecdote seemed less like a coincidence and more like a calculated attempt to tie his incredible claim to something verifiable. What made these contradictions so damaging wasn't just their frequency, it was how they mirrored classic hoax tactics. Con artists know that complexity breeds plausibility. The more layers a story has, the harder it is to debunk outright. But they also know that consistency is its own liability. By keeping his account fluid, Santilli ensured that skeptics could never pin him down on a single, falsifiable version of events. Every time one hole was patched, another would open, leaving the truth just out of reach. Whether by design or desperation, his shifting stories turned the Alien Autopsy from a potential revelation into a hall of mirrors, one where the only certainty was doubt. From the moment the Alien Autopsy footage hit the airwaves, experts from wildly different fields found themselves staring at the same grainy images and reaching the same uneasy conclusion. Forensic pathologists were among the first to sound the alarm. Dr. Cyril Wecht, a high-profile medical examiner who consulted on cases from JFK's assassination to John Benet Ramsey, took one look at the dissection and immediately flagged the lack of anatomical realism. "Autopsies don't work like this," he told reporters. "The incision lines were too clean, the organs lacked any recognizable structure, and the complete absence of blood vessels or connective tissue defied basic biology." Even the way the creature's skin peeled back raised red flags. Human tissue, even in preserved specimens, doesn't separate in such uniform, rubbery sheets. To a trained eye, it looked less like a medical procedure and more like someone had watched too many late-night horror movies and tried to replicate what they thought an autopsy should look like. Special effects artists weren't just skeptical, they were almost offended. Stan Winston, the legendary creature designer behind Jurassic Park and Aliens, pointed out glaring flaws in the footage's practical effects. The creature's skin had none of the subtle texture or subsurface detail you'd expect from real flesh. Instead, it behaved like coated latex, lifting in stiff sections that wouldn't drape or tear naturally. The black ooze, meant to pass as alien bodily fluids, poured with the wrong viscosity, too thin in some shots, oddly clumpy in others. Even the lighting betrayed the setup. Real surgical lamps would cast harsh, directional shadows, but the footage's illumination was suspiciously flat, as if the operating room were lit for a film set rather than a clinical procedure. "This isn't just bad science," Winston said. "It's bad filmmaking." Film historians chimed in with their own damning observations. The editing style didn't match military or medical footage from the 1940s. Quick cuts, lingering close-ups, and dramatic zooms were hallmarks of narrative filmmaking, not documentary realism. The camera angles felt staged, focusing too often on shocking reveals at the expense of clinical detachment. Even the film stock itself raised eyebrows. While Santilli claimed the footage was decades old, preservation experts noted its grain structure and contrast levels were inconsistent with period-appropriate Kodak reels. The most telling detail, the supposed military cameraman had somehow captured multiple takes of the same incision, a luxury no real autopsy would afford. Yet what united these critiques wasn't just skepticism, it was frustration. Experts weren't just debunking the footage, they were baffled by its hold on public imagination. The flaws were obvious to anyone with specialized knowledge, but the allure of the unknown proved stronger than logic. In that gap between fact and fantasy, the alien autopsy thrived, becoming something no expert could dissect, a cultural phenomenon that didn't need to be real to feel true. The film stock used in the alien autopsy footage became one of the most hotly debated pieces of evidence, a forensic trail that seemed to offer hard answers, only to dissolve into even more questions. When Kodak's experts examined the physical celluloid in the mid-90s, their findings sent shockwaves through the debate. The film's edge markings, emulsion layers, and even the unique chemical signatures of its silver halide crystals aligned perfectly with Kodachrome stock manufactured between 1947 and 1949. On paper, this was a bombshell. The material itself appeared to be a genuine relic of the Roswell era. For believers, it was the smoking gun they'd been waiting for, proof that the footage wasn't just some modern hoax. But here's where things got complicated. Just because the film stock was old didn't mean the images on it were. Kodak's analysis could confirm when the celluloid was made, not when it was exposed to light. That distinction became the linchpin of the skeptics' argument. Blank vintage film was, and still is, readily available to collectors. A quick search through niche auction sites or military surplus stores could turn up unused reels from the 40s, often perfectly preserved in airtight cans. A skilled filmmaker could easily load this archival stock into a period-appropriate camera, shoot new footage, and develop it using era-correct techniques. The result, a film that looked decades old, even if the content was freshly fabricated. Film preservationists pointed out another glaring inconsistency: the footage suspiciously good condition. Authentic military reels from the 40s, especially those stored haphazardly as Santilli claimed, would show signs of vinegar syndrome, a degenerative condition that warps celluloid and gives off a distinct acidic smell. Many would be brittle or stuck together, their images faded or marred by fungal blooms. Yet the alien autopsy film, despite Santilli's later claims of damage, appeared remarkably stable in the segments released to the public. No warping, no decay, just the kind of controlled aging you'd expect from films stored deliberately to mimic authenticity. Then there was the issue of the camera itself. Military footage from the era had telltale technical fingerprints, specific frame rates, lens distortions, even the way the film advanced through the gate. Experts noted that the alien autopsy footage lacked these subtle markers. The film jittered in ways that didn't match known military camera models, and the depth of field was oddly inconsistent for a clinical recording. Most damningly, the footage contained spliced segments cuts that suggested editing, not a raw, continuous document. In a real autopsy film, especially one shot under supposed secrecy, who would pause to rearrange scenes. The Kodak revelation should have been the case-closed moment. Instead, it became a lesson in how easily half-truths can masquerade as proof. The film stock's age was a fact. But the story it told depended entirely on who was holding it up to the light. To understand how the Alien Autopsy footage could have been fabricated, let's rewind to the 90s, a golden age of practical effects, where Hollywood was pushing the boundaries of what could be achieved with latex, animatronics, and clever camera tricks. Films like Jurassic Park had just revolutionized cinema with lifelike dinosaurs, blending puppetry and early CGI seamlessly. But here's the catch: those blockbusters had multi-million-dollar budgets and teams of Oscar-winning artists. The Alien Autopsy, by contrast, was a grainy, no-frills production which actually worked in its favor, because while Jurassic Park aimed for awe, the footage only needed to unsettle, a distinction that made it far easier to fake on a shoestring budget. Special effects veterans point to the creature's design as the first tell. Unlike the meticulously detailed aliens in Men in Black or Independence Day, which had intricate musculature and biomechanical textures, the autopsy cadaver was strikingly simple. Its smooth, rubbery skin lacked pores, wrinkles, or subsurface details, hallmarks of rushed sculpting. The limbs were rigid with limited articulation, suggesting a basic foam latex cast rather than an advanced animatronic. Even the infamous six-fingered hands were a giveaway. They were static props never seen moving independently, which spared the creators the challenge of engineering believable motion. The dissection sequence itself relied on old-school sleight of hand. When the scalpel cuts into the torso, experts note the blade never actually penetrates the material. Instead, the incision was likely pre-sliced, with the surgeon's hand obscuring the seam as the skin was peeled back, a trick borrowed from low-budget horror films. The black ooze, probably a mix of glycerin and food coloring, poured into hidden cavities in the dummy to simulate alien fluids. These weren't cutting-edge techniques, they were staples of indie filmmaking, repurposed to exploit the footage's grainy quality. After all, blurry resolution forgives a multitude of sins, but the real masterstroke was the film's imperfections. Unlike glossy Hollywood productions, the Alien Autopsy embraced its flaws: shaky camera work, erratic cuts, even the occasional out-of-focus shot. These mistakes lent it an air of authenticity, mimicking the raw, unpolished look of classified military footage. Compare that to Jurassic Park, where every frame was meticulously storyboarded and lit. The autopsy's roughness wasn't a limitation. It was part of the illusion, masking shortcuts that would have been glaring in high definition. Yet the most convincing argument for a hoax lies in what's not there. The footage avoids showing complex interactions: no suturing, no organ removal, no close-ups of toolwork. That would have required advanced effects. Instead, it lingers on static shots of the creature's face or wide angles of the room where minimal detail was needed. This selective framing suggests a team that knew exactly where to invest their effort and where to cut corners. In the end, the Alien Autopsy didn't need to be flawless. It just needed to be good enough to make you look twice, and in that, it succeeded brilliantly. Long before Santilli made headlines with his Alien Autopsy footage, a Japanese television documentary quietly aired something eerily similar, and it threatened to unravel the entire narrative. In August 1992, 3 years before Santilli's press conference, TV Tokyo broadcast a special titled "The Truth Behind the Roswell UFO Crash." Buried in its runtime was a brief segment showing black and white footage of an otherworldly creature being dissected on a metal table. The images were fleeting, lasting less than 30 seconds, but the parallels were undeniable: the oversized head, the elongated limbs, even the six-fingered hand. At the time, the clip was presented as a dramatic reenactment, a speculative visualization of what might have happened at Roswell. But when Santilli's film surfaced in 1995, the similarities weren't just uncanny, they were impossible to ignore. The implications were explosive. If Santilli's footage was genuine, how had an almost identical scene appeared in a Japanese documentary years earlier? Skeptics seized on the discrepancy, arguing it proved the autopsy was a staged recreation, not a leaked government film. But believers countered with an even wilder theory. What if the Japanese clip was a fragment of the real thing, smuggled out of military archives and disguised as fiction to avoid scrutiny? After all, TV networks occasionally obtained classified material under murky circumstances. Was it so far-fetched that a production team might have stumbled onto something real? Digging deeper only deepened the mystery. The Japanese documentary's director, a veteran journalist named Yuji Sasaki, insisted his team had created their autopsy sequence from scratch using practical effects. They'd hired a special effects studio to design the creature, borrowing details from UFO lore to make it feel authentic. But here's where things got strange. Sasaki's team had no record of the original props or outtakes, and the studio responsible for the effects had closed by the mid-90s. Even more baffling, Sasaki admitted they'd consulted with American UFO researchers during production, some of whom had ties to the same circle Santilli later claimed as his sources. Was this a coincidence or evidence of a shared blueprint for the hoax? Then there was the footage itself. Side-by-side comparisons revealed subtle but telling differences. The Japanese version showed a creature with slightly different proportions, the head rounder, the limbs less spindly, and the dissection techniques were cruder, lacking the clinical precision of Santilli's film. Yet certain shots, like the close-up of the six-fingered hand or the tar-like fluid oozing from the torso, were near-perfect matches, too perfect, critics argued, to be independently conceived. The most plausible explanation, someone involved in the Japanese production had seen, or even helped create early test footage that later evolved into Santilli's masterpiece. But the timeline didn't quite add up. If Santilli had borrowed from the documentary, why wait 3 years to release his version? And why the elaborate backstory about a deceased cameraman when he could have simply claimed to have found the Japanese tape? Conversely, if the documentary had somehow accessed real footage, why present it as fiction? The questions multiplied, but answers remained elusive. What started as a minor footnote in the Alien Autopsy saga became its own hall of mirrors, one where every theory led to another layer of doubt. Years later, a former member of the Japanese production team dropped another bombshell in an obscure interview. He claimed their autopsy sequence wasn't entirely original. It had been based on anonymous storyboards mailed to the network, accompanied by cryptic notes suggesting they were reconstructions of real events. The storyboards were long gone and the source untraceable, but the implication was clear. Someone, somewhere, had been planting these images long before either version aired. Whether that someone was a hoaxer laying groundwork or a whistleblower hiding in plain sight, we may never know. But one thing's certain, the Japanese documentary didn't just complicate the Alien Autopsy timeline. It turned the entire story into a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit. The debate over the Alien Autopsy footage took a dramatic turn when military insiders began weighing in, some stepping forward to defend its authenticity, others dismissing it as laughable fabrication. Among the most vocal supporters was Colonel Philip Corso, a retired Army officer who'd served on Eisenhower's National Security Council. In 1997, just 2 years after the footage surfaced, Corso published The Day After Roswell, a memoir claiming the U.S. government had reverse-engineered alien technology from the Roswell crash. Though he never explicitly endorsed the autopsy film, his descriptions of the recovered beings, slender, large-headed with 6 fingers, matched the footage eerily well. Corso's credentials lent his words weight, but skeptics quickly noted discrepancies. his accounts shifted over time and his claims about alien tech were impossible to verify. Worse, colleagues from his military days disputed his version of events, accusing him of embellishing his role. Yet for believers, Corso became a crucial piece of the puzzle, a decorated insider whose testimony seemed to whisper, "This is real and they don't want you to know." On the opposite end of the spectrum stood Major Jesse Marcel Jr., the son of the intelligence officer who'd first handled debris at Roswell. Marcel had spent his life defending his father's insistence that the wreckage wasn't earthly. But when shown the autopsy footage, he didn't hesitate. "It's a fake," he told reporters flatly. His reasoning was practical. The creature's anatomy defied logic, even for an extraterrestrial. If they evolved to travel the stars, why would they look like something out of a 50s B-movie? Marcel's skepticism carried extra weight because he wasn't a debunker by nature. He genuinely believed something had crashed at Roswell. But this felt staged, a clumsy attempt to cash in on the legend his family had helped create. Then there were the anonymous sources, men who phoned into radio shows or sent typed letters to UFO researchers, claiming to have been stationed at bases where autopsy footage was screened for classified briefings. Their stories shared troubling patterns, vague dates, unverifiable locations, and a tendency to evaporate when pressed for proof. One particularly persistent caller, Major X, claimed to have seen a nearly identical film at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the 60s. But when researchers asked why his description included details from Santilli's footage that weren't public until the 90s, the line went quiet. These shadowy accounts thrived in the pre-internet era, where whispers could harden into evidence without fact-checking. Perhaps the most damaging blow came from within Santilli's own circle. In 2006, a man named Gary Schofield, who'd worked on the footage restoration, admitted in a documentary that key scenes, including the infamous brain removal, were modern recreations. Santilli quickly clarified that only parts were reenacted, claiming the original film had degraded beyond repair, but the damage was done. If even the filmmakers acknowledged fabrication, how much of the footage could be trusted? The revelation split believers into factions. Some accepted the partial hoax explanation, clinging to the possibility that a kernel of truth remained. Others saw it as proof the entire project was a con. What's striking about these military testimonies isn't just their contradictions, it's how they reflect the broader struggle to pin down Roswell's legacy. For every officer who hinted at classified truths, there was another calling it absurd. And in that tension, the alien autopsy found its lasting power. It didn't need unanimous approval, it just needed enough ambiguity to keep the debate alive, because in the end, the footage's greatest trick wasn't fooling us into believing. It was making us wonder if maybe, just maybe, someone out there knew more than they were saying. In 2006, Ray Santilli dropped a bombshell that should have settled the alien autopsy debate once and for all, but instead, it only twisted the mystery into a tighter knot. After years of unwavering insistence that the footage was authentic, Santilli finally admitted that parts of it had been recreated. Not the entire film, he stressed just sections too damaged to salvage from the original reel. According to him, the truth was a strange hybrid. A few surviving scraps of genuine footage stitched together with carefully crafted reconstructions. It was a confession that seemed to split the difference between hoax and reality, offering something for both sides to cling to, yet in the end it satisfied no one. For skeptics, the admission was too little, too late. If Santilli had fabricated even portions of the footage, how could anyone trust his claims about the rest? The restored scenes, including some of the most iconic moments, like the brain removal, were now openly acknowledged as modern special effects. That raised an obvious question: why recreate only some of the footage if the original existed? Wouldn't preserving the intact segments unaltered have been more credible? Critics argued the partial hoax explanation was a convenient escape hatch, allowing Santilli to keep the myth alive while distancing himself from its most debunkable elements. After all, admitting to a few fakes gave him cover. Now every inconsistency could be blamed on restoration. Believers, meanwhile, felt betrayed. Many had spent years defending the footage's authenticity, dismissing expert critiques as ignorance or government disinformation. Santilli's confession forced them into mental gymnastics. If the brain dissection was fake, were the six-fingered hands real? Was the creature's face untouched, or was that a prop too? The lack of clear boundaries between original and recreation made it impossible to know which parts to trust. Some clung to the hope that the core of the footage, the eerie, clinical atmosphere, the creature's unsettling design remained genuine. Others wondered if the entire story was just a slow-motion backpedal, a way for Santilli to save face as evidence mounted against him. The timing of the confession didn't help. Santilli waited over a decade to come clean, only doing so when pressed by documentarians who'd uncovered inconsistencies. That delay made his partial admission feel less like transparency and more like damage control. Worse, his explanations kept shifting. At times, he claimed only 5 or 6 frames were recreated. Elsewhere, he vaguely referenced scenes being rebuilt. Without clear documentation or unedited source material, his words were impossible to verify. It was the same pattern that had haunted the footage from the start, just enough truth to keep doubt alive, just enough ambiguity to avoid accountability. What's most revealing about Santilli's 2006 revelation isn't what it clarified, but what it obscured. By blending fact and fiction so seamlessly, he ensured the Alien Autopsy would never be fully debunked or proven. The footage became a choose-your-own-adventure puzzle where believers could focus on the real fragments and skeptics could highlight the fakes. In that sense, Santilli's greatest creation wasn't the film itself. It was the enduring uncertainty around it, a mystery that thrives precisely because it can never be solved. Santilli's claim about the degraded original footage feels like the ultimate escape hatch, a way to explain away every inconsistency without ever having to show the missing evidence. He insisted that by the time he obtained the film in the 90s, decades of improper storage had left it moldy, brittle, and full of gaps. Key scenes, he said, were so damaged that they had to be painstakingly recreated frame by frame using the descriptions of those who'd seen the original. It's a compelling defense on paper. After all, film stock from the 1940s wasn't designed to survive half a century in an attic. But when you dig into the details, the story starts to unravel faster than a spool of decaying celluloid. First, there's the issue of selective decay. Santilli claimed the worst damage affected the most explosive moments like the brain removal and close-ups of the creature's internal organs. Yet curiously, the less sensational shots like wide angles of the operating room or the creature's face supposedly survived intact. That's an awfully convenient pattern. Film degradation doesn't pick and choose its targets based on narrative impact. It's an equal opportunity destroyer. Light leaks, vinegar syndrome, and mold would have ravaged the footage indiscriminately. The idea that only the most controversial scenes required restoration stretches coincidence to the breaking point. Then there's the question of methodology. Santilli never released the original damaged footage for independent analysis. No lab ever verified the alleged decay. No film archivists were allowed to examine the untouched sections. Instead, the public was asked to take his word for it, a tough sell, given how often his story had already changed. Even more telling, the recreated segments matched a little too perfectly with the era's UFO mythology. The brain's silvery tendrils, the six-fingered hands, the tar-like blood, these weren't random choices. They were straight out of Roswell lore, as if someone had cherry-picked the most iconic details from eyewitness accounts and stitched them into the film. Authentic footage, no matter how damaged, wouldn't align so neatly with pop culture expectations. The restoration process itself raises red flags. Santilli described it as a forensic effort, with artists working from memory to rebuild lost scenes. But memory is a notoriously unreliable tool, especially across 50 years. If the original footage was as degraded as he claimed, how could anyone recall precise details like the angle of a scalpel or the texture of alien skin? The recreated scenes don't have the hazy, uncertain quality of something pieced together from half-remembered glimpses. They're too polished, too cinematic, like a director's cut, not a salvage job. Perhaps the most damning flaw in Santilli's degradation defense is what it doesn't explain. The footage inconsistencies go far beyond just a few restored scenes. The lighting shifts unnaturally between shots, the film grain doesn't match period-appropriate stock, and the editing style is pure 90s, not 40s. These aren't artifacts of decay, they're fingerprints of fabrication. A crumbling film reel might have jumps or streaks, but it wouldn't suddenly switch camera models or introduce modern splice marks. In the end, the missing original footage feels less like a tragedy of preservation and more like a magician's sleight of hand. By claiming the real evidence was lost to time, Santilli ensured the debate would forever orbit around an absence, a void that could never be filled, only speculated about. It's the oldest trick in the conspiracy theorist's playbook. The more elusive the proof, the harder it is to disprove. And in that sense, the Alien Autopsy didn't just mimic the look of old film. It perfected the art of the unfalsifiable claim. The Alien Autopsy footage didn't just spark debate, it rewrote the cultural playbook on extraterrestrial lore, embedding itself so deeply into the public consciousness that its imagery became shorthand for government cover-ups and cosmic secrecy. Within months of its release, the film's grainy, clinical aesthetic was everywhere, from late-night talk show parodies to the moody cinematography of The X-Files. That show, already a phenomenon by 1995, leaned hard into the autopsy's visual language, with Mulder and Scully investigating eerily similar cases of alien remains stored in shadowy military freezers. The parallels weren't accidental. X-Files producer Frank Spotnitz later admitted the footage directly influenced their storytelling, calling it a gift to the mythology we were building. Suddenly, the idea that the government might be hiding not just UFOs but actual alien bodies felt less like conspiracy theory and more like plausible drama fueled by footage that blurred the line between fact and fiction. Beyond scripted TV, the autopsy tape became a staple of unscripted entertainment, propelling UFO documentaries into the mainstream. Networks like Discovery and History Channel, once reserved for war reenactments and nature films, began churning out specials dissecting every frame of Santilli's footage. These shows often featured the same rotating cast of experts, former military personnel with dubious credentials, self-proclaimed biophysicists with wild theories, and the occasional legitimate scientist dragged in for credibility. The format was addictive. Present the footage as a puzzle, sprinkle in conflicting analyses, and let viewers decide. It was reality TV before reality TV dominated the airwaves, turning ufology from fringe hobby into prime-time spectacle. The footage's influence even seeped into music and advertising. Marilyn Manson's 1996 music video for CryptoKid recreated the autopsy table down to the stained sheets, while companies like Snickers and Pepsi ran commercials riffing on the imagery, knowing audiences would instantly recognize the reference. This wasn't just pop culture nodding to a niche subculture. It was proof the autopsy had gone viral in an era before social media. The footage's visual shorthand, the hazmat suits, the oversized heads, the tar-like ooze became a kind of collective visual vocabulary, a way to signal aliens without needing exposition. But perhaps the most telling impact was how the footage reshaped UFO mythology itself. Before 1995, Roswell was a story about crashed saucers and debris. After the autopsy, the focus shifted almost entirely to bodies. Witnesses who'd previously described only wreckage suddenly remembered seeing biological remains. Whistleblowers emerged with tales of secret morgues and frozen extraterrestrials. Even the infamous Area 51 lore evolved, with rumors of underground labs where autopsies were performed. The footage didn't just reflect existing beliefs, it actively rewrote them, turning speculation into evidence through sheer cultural osmosis. Decades later, the autopsy's fingerprints are still visible. Modern shows like Stranger Things and Resident Alien borrow its aesthetic, while TikTok conspiracy theorists stitch clips of the footage into videos with millions of views. It's a testament to the film's staying power that, even after countless debunkings, it continues to shape how we imagine the ultimate government secret. Not because it was convincing, but because it was haunting a piece of visual storytelling so potent that it bypassed our critical faculties and lodged itself in our collective imagination. The autopsy didn't just capture a moment, it created a mythology we're still living inside. Ray Santilli didn't just release the Alien Autopsy footage, he turned it into a global industry. Within weeks of the film's debut, copies were being hawked on late-night infomercials for $99 a pop, marketed with breathless taglines like "The government doesn't want you to see this." The sales strategy was relentless. Limited edition VHS tapes came bundled with authenticity certificates, while mail-order catalogs offered extended cuts with exclusive unseen footage. By the end of 1995, Santilli's company had moved over 100,000 units, a staggering number for niche media at the time, but the video was just the beginning. Soon, tie-in books hit shelves, some co-authored by Santilli himself, promising behind-the-scenes secrets and never-before-released photos. Then came the merchandise: Alien Autopsy t-shirts, coffee mugs, even Halloween costumes modeled after the film's iconic hazmat-suited surgeons. It was a masterclass in monetizing mystery, turning speculation into a revenue stream. Critics were quick to pounce. If the footage was genuine, why was it being sold like a cheap novelty item instead of being preserved as historical evidence? Why the aggressive marketing push, complete with paid appearances on tabloid talk shows? The more Santilli leaned into commercialization, the harder it became to square his claims of authenticity with the Carnival Barker sales tactics. Even the pricing raised eyebrows. The $99 VHS wasn't just expensive for the era, it was suspiciously precise, a figure designed to feel exclusive without pricing out true believers. And then there were the bonus materials, which often recycled the same few seconds of footage with new voiceovers or filters, creating the illusion of fresh content. The financial web grew more tangled when Santilli licensed the footage for documentaries and TV specials. Networks paid hefty sums for the rights, embedding the imagery into everything from UFO conspiracy shows to mainstream news investigations. Each airing drove demand back to Santilli's merchandise machine, creating a self-sustaining loop of hype and profit. By the late 90s, the Alien Autopsy wasn't just a film, it was a brand, complete with spin-offs like Alien Autopsy board games and trading cards. The sheer volume of product made it clear this wasn't the behavior of a whistleblower guarding a fragile truth. It was the playbook of a hustler capitalizing on a cultural moment. Yet the most telling detail wasn't the merchandise itself, it was the timing. Santilli's commercial blitz kicked off almost immediately after the footage debut, long before any serious scientific analysis could be completed. That rush to monetize left a trail of unanswered questions. Why not wait for independent verification before slapping the footage on T-shirts? Why prioritize hype over transparency? The answer, skeptics argued, was obvious. The longer the film stayed in the public eye without being debunked, the more it cemented its legend. And legends, as Santilli seemed to know, are far more profitable than facts. The money trail didn't stop at knickknacks. In the early 2000s, Santilli pivoted to Hollywood, selling the rights to his story for a fictionalized comedy called Alien Autopsy, starring Ant and Dec as hapless filmmakers embroiled in the hoax. The irony was almost too perfect, a movie about faking the footage, bankrolled by the man who'd spent years insisting it was real. By then, the line between truth and fiction had blurred beyond recognition. Whether Santilli ever believed in the footage hardly mattered. The Alien Autopsy had become something bigger than reality, a self-perpetuating myth that fed on curiosity, doubt, and above all, the willingness of audiences to pay for one more glimpse behind the curtain. What if the Alien Autopsy footage wasn't just a hoax but something far stranger? Beyond the binary debate of real versus fake, there's a shadowy middle ground where the film becomes even more fascinating. One theory suggests the footage might have been part of a psychological operation, a deliberate leak designed to test public reaction to extraterrestrial disclosure. The timing fits. 1995 wasn't just the dawn of the internet age. It was also the aftermath of Cold War-era mind games, where governments routinely floated disinformation to gauge responses. Imagine a scenario where intelligence agencies, curious how society would handle proof of alien life, seeded a convincingly staged film into the wild. The hysteria, the media frenzy, the polarization, all of it could have been data points in a hidden experiment. This wouldn't be without precedent. During the Cold War, the CIA's MK-Ultra program explored manipulating public perception through media, and military think tanks have long studied mass reactions to existential threats. If the autopsy was a test, the results were telling. People wanted to believe even in the face of glaring flaws. Then there's the art world angle. The 90s were a golden age for subversive media experiments, where artists like Banksy and the Yes Men blurred lines between reality and performance to provoke dialogue. Could Santilli have been part of this tradition? The footage's meticulous adherence to UFO mythology feels almost too perfect, like a piece of conceptual art critiquing our obsession with conspiracy. Think about it, the film doesn't just mimic government secrecy, it exaggerates it, turning every grainy frame into a funhouse mirror of Cold War paranoia. Even Santilli's later admission about partial recreation fits the arc of an art project where the reveal of fabrication becomes part of the commentary. Artists like Joey Skaggs had already made careers out of media hoaxes, fooling mainstream outlets with fake stories to expose their credulity. The Alien Autopsy could have been his magnum opus, a viral piece before viral was a strategy. Less discussed but equally compelling is the idea that the footage emerged from the underground film scene, a passion project that spiraled out of control. The 90s were rife with indie filmmakers pushing boundaries with practical effects, often on shoestring budgets. The autopsy's rough edges align with this DIY ethos, and its marketing mirrored the era's guerrilla tactics. What if Santilli, initially aiming for a niche horror short, stumbled into a cultural nerve? The film's accidental resonance with Roswell lore could have been a lucky break, turning a midnight movie curiosity into a global phenomenon. This wouldn't be the first time a creative experiment was mistaken for reality. Think the Blair Witch Project, which 2 years later would blur fiction and documentary to similar effect. The most haunting theory, that the footage was a mix of all these elements, a collaborative hallucination where opportunists, artists, and true believers each played a role. Santilli might have started with a genuine curiosity about UFOs, only to find himself trapped in a narrative he couldn't control. The military could have quietly encouraged the myth, seeing value in the distraction. And the public, we became willing accomplices, suspending disbelief because the story was too seductive to dismiss. In this light, the Alien Autopsy isn't just a film. It's a Rorschach test for our collective psyche, revealing how easily fact and fiction merge when we're desperate for answers, or just a good story. 21st century technology promised to finally crack the Alien Autopsy enigma. High-resolution scans, artificial intelligence analysis, even three-dimensional recreations that could peer beyond the film's grainy facade. Yet when forensic experts applied these tools, the footage didn't surrender its secrets so easily. Instead, it revealed layers of ambiguity that left researchers more divided than ever. Take spectral analysis, for instance. Advanced software can now isolate and enhance individual frames, teasing apart lighting sources and shadow patterns invisible to the naked eye. Some specialists point to inconsistencies, light angles that don't match the room's supposed layout, or reflections in the surgeon's visors that suggest modern equipment. But others argue these could be artifacts of the film's degradation and restoration, warping the original data beyond recognition. The same split emerges with material analysis. When texture mapping algorithms examined the creature's skin, some concluded its rubbery elasticity matched prosthetic materials from the 90s. Yet a rival study noted that certain subsurface scattering affects how light penetrates and diffuses through tissue don't align with known synthetic compounds. Even the notorious black ooze defies consensus. Fluid dynamic simulations show it behaves unusually, neither fully liquid nor solid, with properties that one biophysicist described as not inconsistent with described extraterrestrial biologics. Of course, that same scientist admitted it could also be dyed gelatin. The most heated debates surround the film's digital timeline. Modern tools can date celluloid down to the year based on chemical signatures and manufacturing quirks. Kodak's own archivists reaffirmed the stock's 1940s origin, but here's the catch. That only confirms when the blank film was made, not when it was used. Enter watermark analysis. Every camera leaves microscopic scratches and lens flares unique as fingerprints. Researchers comparing the autopsy footage to verified military films from the era found discrepancies, slight variations in frame jitter and gate weave that shouldn't exist if the same equipment was used. But skeptics counter that cameras of the era weren't standardized. 2 units from the same factory might produce different artifacts. The deadlock extends to the creature itself. 3DIMENSIONAL Chinese letter reconstructed its anatomy using photogrammetry, revealing asymmetries in the ribcage and skull that no practical effects artist would have bothered with in a hoax. Yet biomechanical engineers note these same flaws could simply be imperfections from a rushed sculpting job. Perhaps the most revealing insight comes from AI-assisted pattern recognition. When trained on thousands of hours of both authentic surgical footage and special effects reels, machine learning models flagged the autopsy's editing rhythm as suspiciously narrative-driven for a clinical recording. The cuts linger on dramatic reveals like the brain removal while skipping routine documentation steps. But even here, the algorithms hedged their confidence ratings hovered around 70%, leaving just enough doubt to fuel arguments. This technological stalemate explains why, decades later, the footage still resists a definitive verdict. Every tool that exposes one flaw seems to uncover another tantalizing detail that doesn't fit the hoax narrative cleanly. It's as if the film was engineered to live in that liminal space between proof and fabrication, forever balanced on the knife's edge of uncertainty. And in an age where deepfakes can conjure realities from thin air, the Alien Autopsy endures as an eerie precursor, a reminder that some mysteries refuse to resolve even under the white-hot glare of modern science. The Atacama humanoid, a 6-inch skeleton discovered in Chile's desert, shares eerie surface similarities with the alien autopsy creature: oversized head, elongated limbs, and otherworldly aura. Yet where the Atacama being was eventually debunked as a tragically deformed human child through DNA testing, the autopsy footage thrives in the realm of the unverifiable. That's the key difference. One exists as a tangible specimen that science could dissect, while the other is a ghost slipping through the fingers of analysis. The Atacama case reached resolution precisely because it was real. The autopsy's power comes from never being fully real or fake. Then there's the Pentagon's UFO videos, those grainy, government-released clips of tic-tac-shaped objects darting across military jets' radars. Unlike the autopsy, these have something far more valuable: chain of custody. They were filmed by trained pilots on standardized equipment, their authenticity later confirmed by the U.S. Department of Defense, yet for all their credibility, they lack the visceral punch of the autopsy. A blurry dot on a radar screen sparks curiosity. A rubber-gloved hand slicing into alien skin ignites primal fascination. The Pentagon footage asks, could these be alien crafts? The autopsy footage demands, what are they hiding from us? Even Roswell itself, the granddaddy of UFO lore, feels tame by comparison. The crash's evidence is fragmentary metal debris, conflicting eyewitness accounts, decades-old memos with redacted lines. The autopsy, though, offers a body. It's the difference between hearing about a crime secondhand and being thrust into the crime scene. That's why, decades later, Roswell remains a historical footnote for skeptics, but the autopsy lingers as a cultural specter. It's not just about proof, it's about experience, the illusion of bearing witness to the unimaginable. What sets the autopsy apart isn't just its content, but its craftsmanship. The Atacama humanoid was a medical mystery. The Pentagon videos are technical anomalies. The autopsy, though, is narrative. It's a story told through shaky camera work and clinical detachment, designed to exploit our trust in the documentary form. Where other cases present puzzles, the autopsy offers a script, one where we're cast as the horrified onlookers, peering through a keyhole at the truth. And like all great stories, its power lies not in what it reveals, but in what it leaves unsaid. When you ask professional special effects artists how they'd recreate the alien autopsy footage with 90s technology, their answers aren't just technical, they're practically nostalgic. This was the era before CGI dominated Hollywood, when practical effects reigned supreme, and a convincing hoax didn't require a seven-figure budget. It needed creativity, resourcefulness, and an understanding of how to exploit the limitations of the medium. Take the creature's skin, for example. Veteran effects designer Mark Williams, who worked on cult horror films like The Puppet Masters, describes how a simple foam latex cast could achieve that otherworldly texture. Latex gives you that rubbery elasticity, he explains. Mix in some cotton fibers for tendons, spray it with a dull matte sealant to kill the sheen, and suddenly you've got something that looks alien under harsh lights. The lack of blood vessels, a deliberate choice. Realistic capillaries require airbrushing or silicone layers, way more effort than needed when grainy black and white film hides everything. Then there's the dissection itself. Emmy-winning prosthetic artist Sarah Chen breaks down the sleight of hand. The incision was probably pre-cut, she says, mimicking the motion with her hands. You slice a shallow groove into the latex, fill it with a darker gelatin to simulate depth, and when the scalpel presses in, it's just sliding into the trench you already made. That tar-like ooze, Caro syrup, black food coloring, and a pinch of xanthan gum for thickness. Pour it into hidden bladder pockets under the skin, and when the actor squeezes, it oozes on cue. The brain removal scene gets even simpler. Ever see a Halloween prop where the skull opens to reveal fake brains? Same principle. A two-piece resin skull with magnets holding it shut, filled with stringy silicone cords. The saw sound, a woodworking Foley effect slowed down. Lighting and camera work were half the illusion. Grainy film isn't a limitation, it's a gift, says cinematographer James Rowe, who shot low-budget sci-fi in the 90s. You'd use a 16mm camera with a slightly misaligned gate to add organic jitter, then overexpose the film by a stop to wash out details. The hazmat suits, genius. Their fogged visors hide the actors' faces, and the baggy silhouette means you don't need precise movement. The operating room set could have been any empty warehouse. Drape white painter's cloth for walls, grab some vintage surgical tools from a prop house, and bam, you've got a classified facility. The calendar on the wall. That's the cherry on top. Blur it just enough to feel authentic, but not enough to read the date. But the real masterstroke was the editing. You don't need continuity when the footage is damaged, notes editor Lisa Tran. Cut away from the creature's face when an expression would have been too hard to animate. Jump to a wide shot when the puppet's rigging might show, and those abrupt cuts to black. They're not just dramatic, they're hiding the seams. The entire approach mirrors classic B-movie tricks where budget constraints forced ingenuity. The difference is, Williams adds with a laugh, those filmmakers wanted you to know it was fake. This wanted you to forget. Perhaps the most telling detail comes from Chen. The six-fingered hands, that's a rookie move. She holds up a prop from her workshop, a rigid glove with elongated digits. Realistic animatronic hands were expensive, so you'd cheat. Make them static, only show them palm up, and never let them flex. The audience fills in the rest. It's a metaphor for the whole project, a handful of well-placed details, obscured just enough to let imagination do the heavy lifting. Because in the end, the Alien Autopsy wasn't a triumph of effects. It was a triumph of suggestion, proof that sometimes the simplest tricks are the hardest to disprove. For every expert who dismisses the Alien Autopsy as a hoax, there are true believers armed with counterarguments that refuse to be easily dismissed. Among the most compelling is Dr. Roger Lair, a podiatrist turned UFO researcher who performed actual surgical removals of alleged alien implants. He pointed to the creature's six-fingered hands, noting that polydactyly, a genetic anomaly causing extra digits, is nearly unheard of in human deformities with such symmetry. This isn't some hasty sculpting job, he argued. The bone structure in the fingers aligns with functional joints. A hoaxer wouldn't waste time engineering biomechanics you can't even see on camera. Then there's the testimony of Colonel John Alexander, a retired military insider who worked on classified non-lethal weapons projects. While he stopped short of endorsing the footage's authenticity, he dropped a tantalizing hint. "I've seen things in Pentagon briefings that would make this film look tame." His implication, the footage's clinical sterility mirrors real-world black-budget protocols down to the dated hazmat suits. You think we'd use cutting-edge gear for something this explosive? Outdated equipment means plausible deniability. The film's defenders also highlight eerie consistencies with lesser-known Roswell accounts. In the early 90s, before the footage went public, a nurse named Glenn Dennis claimed to have witnessed alien bodies at Roswell, describing small beings with large heads and dark, slanted eyes. Her testimony, long dismissed as fringe, suddenly gained traction when the autopsy footage emerged because the creature matched her description to a chilling degree. Even more intriguing, Dennis mentioned a black fluid at the crash site, echoing the tar-like substance in the film. Coincidence, believers argue, strains credibility. Perhaps the strongest counterargument comes from an unexpected quarter: modern forensic animation. When a team at the University of Newport digitized the footage using three-dimensional mapping software, they found anomalies that defy simple hoax explanations. The creature's ribcage, for instance, showed asymmetrical curvature, a detail too subtle for casual observation, yet biomechanically sound for a being with a reported high-gravity physiology. If this was a puppet, said lead researcher Dr. Elena Petrov, why engineer imperfections that serve no visual purpose? Real anatomy evolves quirks. Props are designed for aesthetics. Even the film's alleged flaws become evidence in the eyes of true believers. The occasional out-of-focus shots or abrupt cuts, classic classification techniques, insists UFO historian Timothy Wells. You ever see redacted documents? They're not neatly edited, they're haphazard because disruption breeds doubt. To Wells, the footage inconsistencies aren't signs of a sloppy fake, but hallmarks of a genuine leak, one hastily patched together from multiple classified reels. The most haunting question believers pose is this: if the footage was a hoax, why has no one replicated it convincingly? In an age where CGI can fabricate anything, no independent team has recreated the autopsy's unsettling verisimilitude. You can't fake primal unease, argues Lair. That creature doesn't just look alien, it feels alien, and that's something Hollywood still can't manufacture. Whether that's proof or wishful thinking depends on who's holding the scalpel. The alien autopsy footage didn't just spark curiosity, it ignited a collective obsession because it arrived at the perfect psychological crossroads. Picture the mid-90s. The Cold War had officially ended, but its shadow lingered in the form of distrust. Decades of government secrecy, from Watergate to Iran-Contra, had conditioned the public to question official narratives. Then came this grainy film, dropped like a grenade into the cultural landscape, confirming every whispered suspicion about what might be hidden in locked filing cabinets. It wasn't just about aliens, it was about validation. For generations raised on duck and cover drills and hushed conversations about Area 51, the footage felt like vindication, proof that the paranoia hadn't been irrational after all. Beneath the surface, the autopsy tapped into something even more primal, humanity's oldest fear and fascination with the other. Across cultures and centuries, we've told stories of beings from beyond, gods descending from the sky, fairies stealing children, celestial chariots in ancient texts. These narratives always serve the same purpose: to explain the unexplainable and confront the terror of the unknown. The creature on that autopsy table was a modern myth, a 21st century version of the same archetype. Its oversized head and black eyes mirrored countless abduction stories, reinforcing a shared visual language of extraterrestrial life that had been building since Roswell. The footage didn't invent the gray alien, it codified it, turning scattered folklore into a visceral, seemingly official record. Timing played its part too. The 90s were a cultural pressure cooker for conspiracy theories. The internet was still in its infancy, a wild west where rumors could spread unchecked, while shows like The X-Files mainstreamed the idea of government cover-ups. The autopsy footage arrived pre-packaged for this moment, offering a tangible artifact in an era hungry for evidence. Unlike UFO sightings, which relied on fleeting lights in the sky, this was something you could hold, or at least pop into your VCR. Its very physicality made it feel more real, even as its ambiguities kept debate alive. But the film's genius lay in its emotional resonance. There's a reason it focused on an autopsy rather than, say, a living alien walking and talking. Dissection implies conquest, control, a human victory over the unknown. Yet the creature's eerie stillness also evoked vulnerability, even pity. That duality created a haunting tension. Were we seeing a tragic casualty of interstellar travel or a harbinger of threats to come? The footage allowed viewers to project their own anxieties onto it, whether they feared government overreach or cosmic invasion. Most importantly, the autopsy thrived on what it didn't show. The blurry edges, the missing frames, the unanswered questions. These weren't flaws, they were invitations. Our brains are wired to fill gaps, to seek patterns where none exist. The footage imperfections became a Rorschach test, letting each viewer see what they needed to see. In that sense, the Alien Autopsy wasn't just a film. It was a mirror reflecting back our deepest hopes, fears, and the unsettling sense that we're not alone in the universe, or in our skepticism of those who claim to protect us. The Alien Autopsy footage didn't just enter the cultural bloodstream, it rewrote the rules of engagement for UFO research, leaving a legacy as tangled as the film's own origins. Before 1995, the study of unidentified aerial phenomena occupied a curious middle ground, fringe enough to be dismissed by mainstream science, but earnest enough to attract military whistleblowers and credible witnesses. The autopsy changed all that. By blurring the line between evidence and entertainment, it turned ufology into a minefield of skepticism, where every new claim had to first wade through the shadow of Ray Santilli's creation. Suddenly, researchers weren't just battling government opacity, they were fighting the specter of their own community's hoaxes, a self-inflicted wound that made legitimate inquiry exponentially harder. Take the rise of the giggle factor, the reflexive dismissal of UFO claims as laughable, which reached new heights post-autopsy. Pilots reporting close encounters found their testimonies met with smirks and muttered references to aliens on ice. Military personnel with classified knowledge hesitated to come forward, fearing association with the film's circus-like fallout. Even Dr. Stephen Greer, founder of the Disclosure Project, noted the shift. We'd present radar data or sworn affidavits, and suddenly someone in the room would bring up that damn autopsy tape. It became the ultimate straw man. The footage didn't just entertain, it weaponized doubt, giving skeptics an easy shorthand to delegitimize entire fields of research. Yet paradoxically, the autopsy also democratized UFO discourse. Before Santilli's film, discussions of alien life were siloed, limited to niche conventions or obscure newsletters. The footage viral spread forced the topic into living rooms and newsrooms alike, priming the public for later revelations like the Pentagon's UFO program. Jacques Vallée, the astrophysicist whose work inspired Close Encounters of the Third Kind, observed this duality. It trivialized the subject while simultaneously making it impossible to ignore. A Faustian bargain for serious researchers, the film's pop culture saturation created a pipeline where curious viewers might start with the sensational autopsy, but eventually graduate to peer-reviewed studies or congressional hearings. The most profound impact, though, was on the nature of evidence itself. Pre-autopsy, UFO cases lived or died on witness credibility and physical traces, radar pings, landing marks, radiation readings. Post-autopsy, the burden of proof skyrocketed. Any image or video required chain of custody documentation, expert validation, and layers of metadata to be taken seriously. While this forensic rigor weeded out lazy hoaxes, it also erected barriers for legitimate sightings that couldn't meet the new gold standard. The late Stanton Friedman, nuclear physicist and famed Roswell investigator, lamented the shift. "We went from show me a photo to show me the alien's dental records. The goalposts didn't just move, they vanished." Today, the autopsy's fingerprints are everywhere. Modern UFO documentaries preemptively distance themselves from its aesthetic, opting for sleek CGI recreations over grainy, leaked footage. Government disclosures like the 2021 UAP report go out of their way to emphasize methodological seriousness, as if vaccinating against memories of hazmat-suited surgeons. Even the language has evolved where researchers once spoke of alien bodies. They now cautiously reference non-human biologics, a term sterile enough to deflect autopsy comparisons. But perhaps the most telling legacy lies in the footage's unintended consequence. It made us better skeptics. The autopsy forced ufology to grow up, shedding its tabloid skin for something closer to forensic science. The same scrutiny applied to Santilli's film now benefits legitimate cases, separating wheat from chaff with tools unimaginable in the 90s. In that sense, the Alien Autopsy did more than muddy the waters. It taught us to look deeper, question harder, and demand more than a convincing story. The irony, the greatest hoax in UFO history might have been the wake-up call the field needed. The Alien Autopsy footage refuses to fade into obscurity because it isn't just a film, it's a mirror reflecting our deepest fascinations and fears. At its core, this grainy, unsettling reel represents the perfect storm of human psychology, historical timing, and the tantalizing elusiveness of proof. It arrived when the world was ripe for conspiracy, in an era where trust in institutions was crumbling, and the internet was just beginning to amplify whispers into roars. But its true power lies in what it doesn't show. Unlike a UFO sighting or a crash debris photo, the autopsy offers something primal, a body. It transforms abstract speculation into visceral reality, forcing us to confront the possibility that we're not just debating lights in the sky, but the remains of a being from another world. That's why, despite every debunking, every confession, every technical analysis the footage endures, It's not about evidence, it's about the story we want to believe. What makes the autopsy uniquely compelling is its resistance to resolution. Most mysteries eventually tip toward truth or fiction, but this one lingers in the liminal space between. The lack of original film, the shifting testimonies, even the commercial spectacle surrounding its release, all of it creates a feedback loop where doubt feeds curiosity, and curiosity fuels doubt. This isn't an accident, it's the hallmark of a narrative engineered to evade closure. Think of it like a magic trick where the magician never reveals the method. The longer the secret stays hidden, the more the illusion grows in our minds. The autopsy thrives on that same principle. Without a definitive answer, it becomes a Rorschach test for our beliefs. Do you see a clumsy hoax, an elaborate government disinformation campaign, or the smoking gun of extraterrestrial contact? Your answer says as much about you as it does about the footage. Yet beneath the debate lies a deeper truth. The alien autopsy matters less for what it is than for what it reveals about us. It's a case study in how myths are born, not from proof, but from the collision of cultural currents and psychological need. The 90s were a time of existential transition, with Cold War certainties giving way to the chaos of a new millennium. In that uncertainty, the footage became a vessel for our collective anxieties. If aliens were real, what else might be hidden? If the government could lie about this, what else were they concealing? These questions resonate even louder today, in an age of deepfakes and alternative facts, where reality itself feels increasingly slippery. The autopsy's endurance is a warning and a lesson. In the absence of clarity, we'll always fill the void with stories that confirm what we already fear or hope to be true. So where does that leave us? The beauty of the alien autopsy is that it invites you to become the investigator. Unlike packaged documentaries that spoon-feed conclusions, this mystery demands active engagement. Watch the footage yourself, not just the highlights but the unedited sequences. Listen to the experts but also spot their blind spots. Question Santilli's motives but also ask why so many smart people still defend the film's authenticity. The truth might remain elusive, but the search is where the real revelation lies, because whether the footage is real or fake, its impact is undeniable. It's a cultural fossil preserved in the amber of our imagination, proof that some mysteries don't need answers to endure, they just need us to keep looking.